Okay. So, hi, my name is Dave Riley. Oh, yeah. My name is Dave Riley. I'm one half of Fast Ride for the Gentleman. It's a video game and cartoon podcast. I'm a writer for Anime News Network and other websites about video games. And my co-host.
Hi, my name is Ajay Chaudhary. I am a professor at Columbia, and now I'm also the director of an independent research and education institute in Brooklyn. And I have a particular interest in video games and critical theory.
All right, so the topic of today's panel is violence in video games, with the catchy title, Not All Headshots Are Equal. So the idea being that the violence in video games is under-theorized. What you kind of get is people talking about whether it absolutely encourages violence from its players or absolutely does not encourage violence, and that's sort of the extent of it.
Right. A lot of this, like, studies you'll read about, like either in the media or through the academic literature, are usually either sort of social science studies or psychological studies. Some of them are pretty good in terms of measuring very specific things. There's a couple. I guess I won't go through the list of like all the different studies, but I mean, generally they measure very, very specific things. So like probably the three most cited studies, one sort of an intrinsic violence versus whatever violence gets sort of imported into people during gameplay. That was inconclusive. Then there was the next one was on looking at games and violent crimes. That was also inconclusive. The only conclusive study was about sort of heightened states of aggression in the brain during gameplay. But this would apply equally to, say, what do we have up there right now?
This is the
Yeah, like, I don't know, shooters as it would to like soccer games. So that again was inconclusive,
like
and
Mario or Tetris.
Yeah, they specifically
sort of brain activity.
Yeah, they specifically also cited that this effect disappears. So basically, this literature is pretty limited. However, it all sort of deals with violence as sort of pretty binary thing. Like, there's violence or not violence, and we thought there's probably worth reflecting on the different ways in which violence can be thought about in video games.
So sort of our first category here is violence as motion. And you see Mario and you're like, what's up? What's that about? Mario's not violent. But then like we have this thing where our sort of catch-all term is things bumping into things, which is how you think of games like Mario or Kirby or Katamari or a game like Child of Eden. And I have this quote from Cliff Bleszinski, who made Gears of War, and like, please don't take this as me saying Cliff Bleszinski is the smartest man of all time. But essentially he says the reason we make games about shooting guns is because that's the easiest touchstone we have for giving players the ability to interact with their environment. And that's why we don't make a lot of games about like talking it out or stuff like that, because that's really hard. But like shooting a gun is pretty easy, and it's like an easy concept to wrap your head around, and it's not actually that different from Mario.
Yeah, and if you think about a sort of Cartesian field or whatever, like a coordinate plane, essentially the easiest thing to think about in terms of objects is that they're out there and they're going to interact somehow, which is essentially them bumping into each other.
Which is like what Mario's doing right now.
Oh, yeah. And the thing is, this isn't a very new idea. So Cliffy B has a nice quote about this about games, but like I pulled this out of Spinoza's Ethics, great early Enlightenment thinker, who's basically, I'm not going to read the whole quote, but basically it's just like all things, and he's actually talking about everything here from like me dropping this pen to like emotions, like getting angry, are essentially one aspect or another of things bumping into each other. So in some sense, like violence at this most basic level, which is just like, the interaction of things, it's hard to sort of nail it down as the sort of graphic violence that we normally think about with video games.
But yet it's conceptually similar.
Yeah.
And the thing that makes this sort of so satisfying and then slowly works its way up to more complex and more graphic games is the sense of kinesthesia, which is like your awareness of what your body is doing and how your muscles are interacting with each other, and et cetera. So when you're like hitting the space bar or you're pushing the jump button and the dude on the screen does something, and how well those systems interact with each other, like some people will call that crunch. So when you think of like when you're playing Gears of War and the dude like shoulder checks the cover to get into it, that feels really good, and it gives you like a sort of a good return on investment for your button press.
Yeah, and even just purely on the sort of games as motion where you have just the most abstract sense of violence. If you think about something like Katamari, you start out in a pretty sort of, there's one mechanic in the game, right? You just roll around and you're picking things up. But by the end of the game, you are destroying the world. So in fact, this very basic, simple motion can not only become incredibly sort of abstractly violent, but it actually ends up producing a certain kind of commentary. There is clearly something going on in Katamari where you start off picking up
like
toasters
thumbtacks,
and thumbtacks
erasers,
and there's all these basic consumer
mice,
goods, and
then
by the end,
it's like human beings that are running screaming in terror.
Yeah, and cities.
I guess I didn't put that video in there.
That's
but
okay.
Like, you're just like grabbing these people as they're running away, and you're using them to create the moon.
So, point being that a lot of the, even some of the most, like, the thing about Kirby, I mean, or Katamari, those are both great examples. Some of the things that seem like the least violent game possible, can actually do work on some sort of basic physical violent mechanic. I was thinking, this is where I was talking about Dear Esther, or the only game I can think of that is truly 100% non-violent, like non-conceptually, we're going to talk about normative violence later, is Dear Esther, where all you do is walk around an island. It's a really cool game, but it's definitely operating on a sort of different principle.
And what you describe in Katamari is the like chaotic glee that we sort of searched for a term for.
Yeah.
But this idea that I guess like the satisfaction you're deriving from it is like divorced from the idea of.
I think, at first, I think by the end it's weird. If you reflect on it,
what they're putting down.
Yeah, I feel like if you reflect on Katamari by the end, it's actually saying something. It's saying quite a bit about like what is this desire to collect things.
Yeah. The like you've been picking up consumer goods.
Yeah.
Like you said, and then there's essentially nothing to the actual game. You're just like moving back and forth, sort of like parallel parking a car for like the entire game.
Although I love that game.
Yeah, I mean it's really great. And then so we have section 2, which is Nazis, aliens, bugs, and zombies.
This is your sort of basic shooter, one side is totally morally cast as evil and allowed to be killed.
Which is like So we wanted to start kind of like with the idea of something like House of the Dead, where the oppositional force is just like explicitly evil in this totally unredeemable way because they're like evil zombies that eat people and crash cars and do whatever. But then you move from that to Call of Duty, which is functionally the same idea, but they've just replaced the people with actual human beings. It's just that they're still cast as this like immutable evil.
And there tend to be two kind of basic responses, both in the sort of academic literature, and I feel like also in just media literature, and also just sort of if you troll gaming forums and stuff, like looking for stuff, to this kind of game. Like on the one hand, people will be like, well, look, just shooting aliens, just shooting Nazis, it's totally cool. Don't worry about it. The mechanic is sort of put to the side. And that's sort of the it's just a game, don't worry about it reaction. And then equally opposed is in fact looking at the same exact situation and saying, well, that's precisely the problem, right? So you look at something like a zombie shooter, and it actually, since the target, the object, is so evacuated of meaning, you're not really thinking about what you're doing. So you're being sort of habituated into violence. And these are sort of the positions that a lot of those studies are working on.
That's the literature. It's like either it is or it isn't.
Right. And there's probably, and some of these games sort of encourage that. So I would say, like, my brief experience trying to play
Call of Duty
Modern Warfare, I did not get very far, was sort of felt like that. I was like, it also, there's a lot of problems with that I don't have to get into. But, like, it did feel very much like, my reaction was like, I am just in some kind of simulator that is meaningless. And
it's kind of like a mid-90s like TV show sci-fi simulator. Like you're just in this corridor that looks like a battlefield, but really you're just sort of walking in a straight line, and these like virtual things pop up that you shoot with your ray gun, which is like an intricately modeled real life gun, actually.
Yeah.
It's like that they paid for a license to put this real gun in the game.
Um,
But like, yeah, the idea is that the enemy is amoral.
Yeah.
And you are good, and that's the end of it. And we tried to get Modern Warfare 2. It turns out I got rid of it a long time ago. But that, I think a lot of people have made like a really interesting case for the beginning of that game, because the first level you're like in a Hummer or something. You're like on a machine gun driving around in Afghanistan, and you're walking around you're driving down the streets, and it's really tight, and it's supposed to be really claustrophobic, and you're like, people are peeking at you through windows, and you're waiting for things to jump off, and then eventually they do, and everybody disappears, and they're just replaced by terrorists.
Yeah.
And which is just like sort of a weird, just given all the context of the actual engagements happening in that part of the world. Like, there is no situation where it's just like, oh, 50 terrorists just showed up and we have to kill them all, and we're just like in an open fire situation where let's kill all the bad guys.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, it was actually on one, I think it was on one of the earlier slides, but we don't have to go back to it. But, you know, one of the quotes we had up there was from a media theorist. She died last year. Her name was Miriam Hansen, but she was saying that one of the most valuable potential things about games, because she was a film theorist, and then her life was sort of thinking about, well, maybe games are actually more of a technological art than even cinema was. And one of the things that she thought was so fascinating about it was that, you know, either commercial or sort of experimental games put the player in morally, politically conflicting, I'm now just reading her quote, situations vis-a-vis violent action, especially games that test our affective, meaning our sort of emotional, our cognitive, and our ethical capabilities by scrambling the boundaries between player, subject, avatar, and targets, between humans, non-humans, and machines. I think that's largely right. I think that's what happens in a sort of very interesting game experience, and it's kind of what called the Modern Warfare 2 thing avoids by sliding out the morally problematic situation.
Yeah, but isn't that it's sort of part of the same rubric, just
Yeah.
by virtue of it like not addressing it. But
Yeah.
and that's the thing about the like shock level in the airport in Call of Duty 2, where you have to, under the guise of a terrorist, you have to murder like a bunch of civilians, and it just really feels this like super crass, like, here's how we're gonna get you.
The funny thing, if I recall correctly, and I actually this is all from visual, that
you don't have to shoot. You can just wander around,
which
and
actually
watch
to
everybody
me,
else do all the murder.
which actually to me makes it more problematic. In fact, if they made you be like, okay, I'm going to be super marine, commando, ranger, undercover guy, and I'm going to have to murder some innocent people to forward the mission, that would be like a pretty brave narrative choice for a game, because you would have to actually experience that as a player. And I think one of the directions that I think we sort of ended up going in a lot of these categories when we were thinking about violence in games is that the most interesting games tend to play off what is the sort of emotional experience, what is the play experience of the player, as opposed to sort of what is the graphical visual experience like in a film.
And then, so from there, we wanted to use Team Fortress 2 as sort of a transition case, where just morality is sort of, it's removed from all parts of the equation, and you feel just as robotic as your opponents, and there's no like inherent good to red team or blue team.
Yeah, there's a real abstraction.
And there's like limited subjectivity.
Yeah. There's a real there's a real abstraction in the first case with the sort of zombie shooter, right? Zombies basically are just squares that you're going to shoot. They're triangles. They're pure geometry. Like after about 30 minutes of playing the game, you barely even see them. But in something like Team Fortress 2, you also you self-reflect as an abstraction. You're not like, well, I'm the best heavy-duty man who ever existed.
Well, I think the lore of the game, I think.
There's lore in that game?
As much as there is that explicitly that you're like a clone or something.
Okay.
Probably, right. So they're just making literal stuff like respawns in video games and just being like, don't worry about it, that's just part of the world.
And I think one of the reasons why it's sort of interesting, what we called it a transition case, is that you can still think about even without this sort of subject-object problem, you can still think about things like, well, what does it mean to have a game that is based entirely on targeting things? So we're not at the level of Mario bumping off the, blocks or off the Goombas, which, is still technically, I guess, killing something. But you're really at this level where the primary mechanic is to be looking down the barrel of a gun and targeting a subject, or an object, rather.
So are we moving on to can it be anything else?
Well, you want to play the video?
And so you guys probably all saw this on the internet, on your Twitters or what have you, but this is Viscera Cleanup Detail, which just released some alpha footage. So this is, can FPSs be anything other than violent? Well, they can be sort of post-violence.
Yeah. We also had here Portal is an obvious example of a game where you are still essentially staring down the barrel of a gun, but it is not the targeting feeling. You're not targeting objects or human subjects.
The most you do is drop a portal under a turret.
But the fun thing about can you actually see this? It might be hard to see. Anyone seen this game? The alpha just came out a day ago.
Friday, I think, so maybe you guys were all here and not looking at Twitter. But the idea is that some horrific event has happened on this space station, and you're the janitor. So you can...
you are always post-conflict, and so
Yeah.
you are cleaning up someone else's FPS.
So you see
mess.
him picking up chunks of body and whatever.
And it's actually a lot. I tried playing this. It's actually a lot of work. They do not make it easy.
The video itself makes it look really sort of miserable.
Yeah, your mop gets really messed up, and and the thing is, it really does turn the mechanic against itself. You're still using all of. I think it is. It's not a Source Engine game.
It looks like Source just because of the way they're picking up.
But it's Unreal. I know
chunks.
it's an Unreal Engine game, but it looks like a Source Engine game. So it looks like you're just cleaning up after Half-Life.
Yeah.
And it's using all those same little physicsy things, but it's obviously you're still doing targeting.
It's super dark, yeah.
It's super dark.
Unfortunately, it's super bright.
But all the mechanics of a shooter are here, right? The mop is your gun. You are targeting things, but clearly it would be hard to sort of refract this even in the sort of abstract way of the violence of the targeting in a game like Team Fortress. So even something as explicitly targeting as a first-person shooter can have a lot of commentary on violence and also just do other things.
Well, this is also the question, if I may borrow my wife's dream idea for a video game, which is a first-person shooter, but you're chilling out with these animals, say Pokemon or what have you, and you're not shooting them, you're shooting them with hearts. You're throwing biscuits at them to make them your friends. And then you bring the animals home and they build a town.
See, the biscuits feels less violent to me than the hearts.
But
the hearts feels like some kind of mind control device.
So that's the thing is is that still coercive or what do you do? Maybe you have a game where you hand people flowers, but
So in all of these cases, whether it be the Nazis, the zombies, the aliens, what else do we have here, bugs, or in a really sort of these more abstract cases like Viscera Cleanup Detail, you're dealing with really sort of, like I said, morally evacuated subjects and non-human subjects, which we thought was one case, one obvious and major case after the Mario case for how violence in games works. Do you want to?
All right.
Or do you have more to?
No,
say
I'm
on
good.
this?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's move on.
Go ahead.
No.
Should I say?
Yeah.
Our third category we called regular humanoids, which sort of deals with, and the sort of transition case we thought was interesting was Monster Hunter, not because it actually has humanoids in it, but because one of the things that happens in Monster Hunter.
So you're starting out. You're fighting this cartoon monster that might as well be a Dragon Quest or a Final Fantasy enemy for all its characterization. It's flapping its wings around and it's shooting fireballs at you and it's knocking you over and you really hate it and you're pretty mad because it keeps knocking you down and it takes 50 seconds to get up in that game. And if this was a turn-based game, you'd be casting fire magic and it would blink when you hit it. And then as its health depletes and it gets tired, so it exhausts itself and it starts drooling, and then it flees to either take a nap somewhere or eat. or whatever. And then eventually it's been beaten so hard that all it wants to do is really get away. And the game, or you, I guess, start imputing this like character to these monsters because, they stumble around, and when they charge at you, when they're tired, they like fall over and like flip end over end. And you're breaking pieces of their body.
And this is actually built into the gameplay mechanics itself. If you do not notice the effective responses of the monsters in Monster Hunter, you cannot actually like trap them. You cannot know when you're gonna have to circle around or like when it's gonna be a good time to use your combo. So it in fact is playing off your emotional reaction to essentially these things transforming from sort of terrifying, I am totally justified in killing you, this is great, to I don't feel so rad anymore.
And you kind of think about like, or at least I did eventually, you start thinking about like the post-hunt situation of this village where you're bringing these like wounded, enormous monsters back to this fishing village, and you're like, what are they doing with all these monsters? And like, are they making a zoo? Or are they gonna like take over the world? Because they have all these like wyverns.
But the thing is, this is a sort of transition case into games that deal with real people. So there's actually I feel like it's a relatively new turn in games. I mean, things like Counter-Strike, I guess you could think of as like a real people thing, but
that's
it's
probably
like
the thing that
basic.
like really popularized it, or
Right.
maybe Half-Life to a certain extent, but like you're still murdering aliens in that. It's just that there are human beings around for once versus Quake or something like that, where it's just straight up zombies and like giant Cthulhu monsters.
And sometimes this can be sort of pretty ambiguous. And you get sort of the Uncharted kind of thing, where like you have a really sort of realistic characterization of or a really full characterization of the character you are playing, that is sort of in complete conflict with what you are doing, which is killing tons and tons of dudes who like might be evil pirates or might not be evil pirates.
Yeah, at worst they just seem like they're sort of jobbers, but they're like the most dedicated henchmen ever by the time you get to like the third game, and the mansion is on fire and collapsing around you, and they're like still hanging out and shooting you, or like at the end of the game literally like a plane is exploding in midair and they're still taking the time to like get down behind cover and shoot you with their assault rifle, which sort of kills the illusion a little. And I don't know, we disagreed on this a little, but my take on Uncharted is that the violence you are inflicting on the people isn't like significantly different than your average Indiana Jones movie.
Okay.
There's just like 500 times more instances of it. So it becomes like a little beleaguering. So the example I gave, which you seem to disagree with, is like, I think in the third game, I think it is, there's just like sort of like a melee takedown where you like pull a pin on a dude's grenade on his vest and you like push him away and you're like, whoa, 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 like sort of goofy Indiana Jones sort of reactionary stuff, but like a little more sadistic than that. But not entirely out of line with the like Indiana Jones shoots a dude who's brandishing a sword at him, sort of like non-committally or disaffected. But yeah, the fact that you see that like grenade thing like 30 times over the course of the game.
Oh, I didn't realize it happened more than once.
Oh yeah, it's just like something that happens to a dude when you are punching him.
I mean, this gets to something that I know we're going to talk about later, so maybe we can table Uncharted until then. But like, I feel like the thickness was sort of a good term from anthropology, from Clifford Geertz, right? The thickness of a world, like how thick a culture feels, how many layers of meaning are being stacked. I feel like there's a lot more thickness in Indiana Jones than there is in Uncharted.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
But I mean, one of the things that I thought was interesting, about sort of games with real humans, even military shooters, and the example here that really stuck out for me is Spec Ops, which I don't know if people saw our last panel or not, but Dave talked a lot about Spec Ops. This, and maybe I'll talk a lot about Spec Ops this time. Was that in this space, like, done well, games can become a commentary on sort of game violence, on gaming, and also on sort of real world violence. So to me, when I played that game, I thought of this article that I had read several years ago, actually long before Spec Ops came out, and it's sort of stuck with me a while. It's by a Pakistani novelist, Kamila Shamsi. And It's a long article. It's available for free. It's on the website Guernica. You can look it up. It's really about how in World War II there were all these novels about the sort of experience of going to Italy, going to Germany, going to Japan, and sort of fighting and what that felt like in a sort of very visceral way. And at the end of it, she says like, send us your artists, send us your writers to because there is this. And the quote we have here, she says, the nation that has intervened militarily with more nations than any other in the latter half of the 20th century, which would be us, but has itself come under attack infrequently, would now see its stories bound up with the stories of other places. The writers, this is what she assumed would happen, right? There would be all these stories about war that would be about this experience of war. And she's like, but they didn't happen. And if you think about the sort of cinema of war that we've had, things like The Hurt Locker and things like that, they tend to, or even Zero Dark 30, I don't know if you guys saw that one, they do abstract away quite a bit from any sort of, a lot of the political and moral implications. They tend to focus purely on sort of psychology and things like that. And she really wanted a sort of morally engaged literature. And I was thinking about this and I was like, you know what, the closest I have come to that experience is playing something like Spec Ops. Like maybe she shouldn't be looking at novels. In fact, in the gaming space, there might be a new kind of literature that is dealing with this. So in something like Spec Ops, like I can't help but reflect on my, they do this to you. It's very clearly in the game design, right? So you're like, one of the first actions in the game, you're sort of going down to target these two guards, and they're like chatting about the beautiful Arizona skyline.
Well, I mean, I think why everybody remembers that is because the one guard starts a conversation with the other by asking for a stick of gum.
Yeah.
Which is like not something, I mean, certainly stealth games are really big on giving you incidental dialogue. But even that's usually like, where'd you put the key to the locker where we stored all the mines?
Definitely in some of the Metal Gear games, I feel like occasionally the guys would be like, "You got to smoke," or I feel like,
I'm trying to think of like
they're eating or sleeping.
I mean, even the like the Metal Gear guys are frequently like just
incompetent,
like literally faceless, like have masks on.
That's true.
I'm thinking of stuff like Dishonored or Deus Ex, like games where the whole point is to be around a corner when two dudes are talking and wait for them to stop talking and then like shank or choke one of them. But in the meantime, like, there's a couple parts in Dishonored where like, I think the first level of Dishonored, which is like, it's like this kind of steampunky game, or late 19th century sort of vibe. There's like it's a theocracy for the most part. And so you have to infiltrate the headquarters of like the Grand Inquisitor or whatever. And if you end up in the lobby, you can like overhear this conversation kind of like about like, hey, what's our faith about? And there's a dude just orating.
Right, and I feel like that happens in multiple times in Spec Ops. In fact, in one point, if I recall correctly, in Spec Ops, I should have grabbed that video. I believe you can hear a guy being like, I don't even know what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Like, you really have this deep characterization of the people you are killing. And you also have this weird experience where in fact, the mechanics are basic first-person shooter. It is incredibly graphic. It gets more so as the game goes along.
Well, it's pretty crazy because like when you start that game, if you get like a headshot, it zooms in like 10%, like sort of just enough for you to notice, and like shows you, it just goes like poof, like a big thing of blood.
And the funny thing is, I feel like the intersection of the mechanic with this sort of really interesting setting and the way in which both the sort of target and your characters are characterized, it sort of shows how this violence is being produced. And this to me is really fascinating because this is a really kind of interesting thing that games can do, where we can actually look at to me, I'm not sure if we 100% agree on this or not, but like when I look at the Dubai setting, which is like, Dubai is a very, very strange place to put this game. It's sort of like this weird, artificial, like sprang up out of nowhere city of pure capital. And like I think about like your guys are like classic sort of new American army dudes like coming in, so it's like the intersection of capital and empire, and it's producing this massive amount of violence that seems to be unjustified on like no one seems to be happy. The civilians, the enemies, your buddies, everything is worse, and it just keeps on growing, right?
It's sort of like this, I don't know, it's like the fallacy of no return.
Right.
Maybe you'd call it, like eventually like there is no cutting your losses in this
Right.
game, or at least that's from the characters thing. And that's sort of like it's an interesting way to look at most video games. At like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of video games where you can be like, maybe this is the part where you would have stopped. Like even in
Right.
stuff like Resident Evil, you'd be like, maybe you would have left at this point. Like you would have found a car and left the city.
Yeah, and the point is not, for me at least, is not to say that all games. Clearly, I feel like Modern Warfare, Spec Ops is a great pair because I feel like Modern Warfare does not do this, but Spec Ops does. And so it's really interesting about why and how we can sort of think about ways to talk about video games where we can start seeing these things happening more clearly.
It's also interesting that Spec Ops, gives you tools that make the violence pretty fun. Like
Yeah.
it's not like one of these games
Yeah.
where it's like we are going to make you miserable to play this game. Like there's all the different guns and they have like attachments and grenade launchers and
And the
stuff.
mechanics work, the ordering, your squad commands work, all that stuff is very strong.
So like, I mean, I feel like a lot of these times when games are like, we're going to talk about violence, like what you have to get around is being like, we're going to make this miserable. Like it's going to be just
like Shadow of the Colossus.
excruciating to play. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, Shadow of
I
the
guess
Colossus
I
just
always-
has sort of like bad controls.
I always found Shadow of the Colossus
Bad
really hard to
camera.
play, and so simultaneously
Yeah, you're mad at the controller
Yeah.
and you're like sort of mad at the game for
And-
like roping you along.
and you're mad at yourself for
Yeah.
being such an asshole.
But it's so much fun.
So yes, so do you want to switch
Well,
into?
the thing I had
Okay.
really early on, I had a quote, like one of the first slides from Michael Haneke, I think his name's pronounced. He's Austrian. He's the director of this movie in the late '90s called Funny Games, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with, but it's sort of one of these standard like thriller movies where like the psychopaths take over the house and kill the family. But his intent was was to sort of frame the viewer, or to put the viewer in the psychopath's perspective, not necessarily mind, but just like to make you aware of your sort of your voyeurism. And so the quote he gives is sort of, how can we make the audience aware of their role in the loss of reality? How can the viewer be transformed from media victim to potential participant? Right. And he does this by sort of like breaking the fourth wall a lot, like one of the killers will like wink at the camera or stuff like that. But the reverse is really true in video games, that video games don't really frame the player as a victim almost ever. There's stuff like even in Resident Evil, like you have a grenade launcher. Like as scary as Resident Evil can be, like there are a few times when you're truly just completely disempowered. Amnesia is pretty good at that, where like Amnesia, which is another horror game, you have no way to fight back. Like all you can do is hide. And if you hide in the dark from the monster, you get really scared and then you like pass out.
This is a question.
Call of Cthulhu, could you put that there as well?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. Call of Cthulhu, I have a bias in that I really didn't like that game. And I do like Cthulhu a lot, like just Lovecraft in general. I haven't played that game in a long time, but I remember it being like really frustrating. But totally, like there are parts in that where like I remember there's a part where you have to like climb across the rafters, and it turns out your character is afraid of heights. So you're sort of like freaking out while you're trying to get across. And yeah, in Call of Duty or Call of Cthulhu specifically, I took a lot of issue with like, here's the infinite god of all powerful being from under the sea. We got this boat cannon, let's shoot him with it.
I have not played
So
this
it
game.
it felt like a little silly to me and sort of counter the point. I'm trying to think of like, there have been a few of these like Lovecrafty sort of games. Amnesia is certainly one of them. I wish I had another example. I think actually like if you guys have played like the Mansions of Madness board game, that's like really good at making the players feel like they are just like completely harried. You essentially got this like DM that's constantly respawning like eldritch abominations. And
Well, I mean, if we go back to the sort of stealth game question,
Yeah.
that's one in which the sort of like the player isn't necessarily. I mean,
I think the thing is you usually are.
is what?
Like you usually feel like, hey, I'm so wimpy because I don't have like an infinite health
Yeah.
bar or regenerating health. But you're usually like in Dishonored, you're just like this super badass who's got like a sword that you can just stab anybody with at any time. Or like Deus Ex, like you eventually get powers where you like clunk two guys' heads together like the Three Stooges.
No, but when I think about something like Metal Gear, even when you are like Snake, classic war hero kind of character, and yet you're the interaction between the characterization and the mechanics sort of produces this effect where you do not feel invincible. You do not feel particularly like you are
What
being,
you ought to be.
Yeah, like you know that your character knows that things don't seem quite right and that nothing seems to be going quite right.
Yeah.
And that you don't want to be killing people. So this is both sort of conveyed to you through the mechanics and the oft-derided cutscenes of that game itself, but also through like its little scoring system. And you are being discouraged from certain kinds of violent action, and there's a lot of commentary going on about like, well, should I? Oh, is that the next one? Yeah. Okay.
It's a couple slides ahead where it's just a picture of the Metal Gear Solid scoring system, but it's like, you spend the whole game being like, killing ain't no good, but I guess I gotta kill some people, and that's just the way it is. And then at the end, it's like, nah, but you didn't really. Like, you could have not, and then you would have gotten big boss rank.
Yeah, in 4, I actually didn't know you didn't have to kill the like corporation leader girls that you.
Oh yeah. Well, that's been sort of the classic thing since 2, is that you can just tranquilizer them.
I did not know.
But I mean, it doesn't. I think they still end up dying in all the games. It's just like it's purely for your purely for your peace of mind. It's like, no, I tranquilized that boss. In the cutscene, they still like exploded in a gout of blood. But I don't remember. Does maybe 4 changes that? Like that's how it was in like 2 and 3.
The guys exploded in a cloud of blood.
Yeah, always like.
Oh, you mean the bot?
You like shoot him with the tranquilizer in the fight, but
if
then.
I recall correctly, they like turned to some weird ghost or something.
Well, there's that like weird thing in 4 where you get put in like a white room and then you get to like take sexy pictures.
Let's not. Yeah, let's leave that. That we actually will get to that later.
But yeah, this is the failure of binary moral systems, aka did you kill this guy or not? By the way, he's a Nazi. Which is like we had that funny experience in Metro Last Light, which is like post-apocalyptic. Russian, I think it's made by Polish people. The story is that like the nuclear bombs fell and everybody took shelter in the metros in Moscow, and that's the end of humanity. But there's Nazis and communists still, and they're still like fighting this war. And kind of the interesting thing about Metro is that while the Nazis and the communists are fighting this war underground, humanity has mutated into these like feral dog-like creatures who could just kill everybody if they felt like it. And that's like the end game for humanity, is that like your guys' time is over. That sort of feels like the message.
Yeah, I've always loved, that's actually I think the strongest part of that game.
So when we were playing Metro Last Light and you were in the room and you're like with your new commie buddy and you're mounting a daring escape from the Nazi camp, and your friend like draws down on this Nazi and you're on this tram and you're about to drive away and the Nazi's like still sitting there with his hands over his head, and we're like, do we shoot him? And so we kind of just did, because it was like, I guess he's a Nazi.
Yeah.
So it makes it a little weird.
I mean, but if you think about when people try to build morality systems into games, the most often cited example would be like the first BioShock, right? Harvesting the little sisters. Think about something like Mass Effect, right? You get your Paragon points, you get your Justice points.
Paragon and Renegade.
Renegade. Yeah. Same thing for their Star Wars games beforehand.
Yeah, light side, dark side.
Yeah. They tend to be as ridiculous as like, I will like, save these puppies or burn down this orphanage. Like it tends to be pretty absurd. One of the things that's really fascinating about moral systems and BioShock, the first one, is there actually is a lot in that game going on with morality. There actually is a lot in that game going on with how players should be experiencing or can be experiencing the violence of that world, thinking about things like, well, what would it be like to live in a world in which there really were no laws and you in fact could just like vending machines like shoot out like, lightning,
which is why it's really
powers.
well contextualized. It's like, all right, we set up a society where vending machines can have lightning bolt powers.
And again, you get that. And
that's a lot of the problem with BioShock Infinite, is that they did not set up a world where vending machines can have lightning bolt powers in them. So.
Yeah, I mean, before we get to Infinite, though, you get that same effect in BioShock 1, where violence is produced as a natural interplay of the player and the world. The player, the world, and I don't know what you want to say, the player, the world, and the targets. But you almost you feel a lot more sympathy. Like you understand. I can't now. It's been ages, and we didn't put notes for Bioshock One, but the characters on the other side of the screen, let's say, feel quite real. I actually felt a lot of sympathy for them as parts of this world, as parts
For the little sisters, or like the named
No,
characters?
I mean like these main characters, like the artist guy.
Yeah.
And
Oh, okay. So,
like
yeah.
they feel like people who have suffered through this existence, and it's and the violence doesn't just feel purely random, except when you're dealing with like the slicers,
Yeah.
the splicers rather. Infinite's a different problem altogether.
Well, I guess regarding morality, before we move on to
yeah.
Bioshock Infinite, which is a slightly different topic, the thing that we discussed last night that we didn't take notes on is that the morality system in Bioshock Infinite is really weird because they train you to think you need to kill these guys. So there's the little sisters who harvest this resource called Adam, which you use to get magical powers. So your like buddy in your earphone is like, you got to kill these guys and get their Adam, otherwise you're not going to have enough magical powers and you won't be able to survive down here. So it's training you that like you have to kill these things, and of course like nobody kills them because they're like 8-year-old girls, and it turns out that if you don't kill them, it's actually better in the long run.
Yeah.
Like the game rewards you like substantially better for not murdering children, which is not like, I'm not against that like construct of morality.
Right, but if it was going to be a more powerful, even as a binary system, if it was going to be more powerful, I mean, you'd have to do something like dismember, like you'd actually have to like do something very unpleasant and uncomfortable perhaps as a player, and in fact lose power the other way. So like, let's say you had to save them by losing half of your health bar. Then you could build this into the system, and it actually would feel, I think, slightly more meaningful.
Yeah, if you had to like imbue them with some of your energy so that they could keep living.
Yeah.
Or I mean, it's really odd because they're these like zombified like worker bees kind of
The
in the
little
game.
sisters,
And then when
yeah.
you save them, they become like little girls again, and they're like, "Oh, gee, thanks, mister," and they like scuttle away. Which is weird, and that seems like just primed for like, oh, you gave up 1/10 of your mana bar to like fix this girl, and instead like it's like, you got 20% less whatever Adam, but if you get 3 in a row, then here's like a big surprise package at the end. That's literally a present.
I was
with
gonna
like
say,
a teddy bear and a bow on it.
And also, it's been ages since I played Bioshock 1, but they give you this awesome, they start just giving you awesome stuff.
You get like powers that you could not otherwise acquire. Which is the thing, is it was a split, like you are getting 0 or even negative for saving these girls, and like but the other alternative is that like you have to outright like murder them. I mean, it's not weird that you can't like dismember a little girl in the video game, I don't think. But the idea being that like you are lighting on fire everything else in the Bioshock world except for these children who like it fades to black, and you're like, cool.
Yeah, and sort of the question of violence here becomes like how, like the weird way in which violence becomes then like this becomes sort of an a violent or a non-violent interaction with the little sisters.
Yeah, which is
if you
really odd
don't
because it's
save
like
them.
it's the only one in the game.
Yeah, it's very strange.
And then so that moves us into our next topic, which is thick worlds, which is still under the umbrella
humanoids.
of humanoids. But the idea being that Bioshock Infinite to a certain extent, they put you down in this world and you spend like an hour before you even, or maybe you spend 15 minutes. If you poke at like all the carnival stands, you spend an hour exploring this like county fair and like meeting all these like well-to-do people in this sort of like turn of the century, happy-go-lucky like early 20th century town, and everything seems pretty nice, and that's intentional.
Yeah,
because they're like, hey, look how great this world is, but isn't it like a little weird how it's like all white people?
Yeah.
And they keep talking around this issue.
And it's not just that it seems nice and it's peaceful for the first hour. I mean, it's actually something that happens throughout the game, although we'll talk about how it sort of gets sort of turned in a weird direction. But I think the thickness here, what expresses that, is that like the world feels like an inhabited world. People are having conversations that feel like they are, decently possible conversations. This world has a music. It has culture.
Oh, yeah.
It has, it feels like a living, breathing place. And yet, all of a sudden, after you spent an hour at the city fair with weird racist theocracy land, all of a sudden you are thrust immediately into sort of dismembering
just
a
like
guy's face.
graphic, like about one of the most graphic things
Do
I've
we
ever
have-
seen.
do we have that?
Yeah, okay, so the thick world is the difference between sort of this, where these like cartoon men like tag team a rock lizard with chainsaws and he explodes into these like manageable, like 2 feet long chunks of innards.
This is Gears of War
Yeah.
1.
And then there's that, which is like, hey, regular looking human being, let me like shove this weird hook into your face that I just acquired 1 second ago.
And the thing is, I don't know if people have all played Bioshock Infinite or not, but in that scene, this is triggered by what seems like it's going to be one of these morality systems, right? So you're handed this baseball, and you're going to either peg this
There's an
interracial couple, and you're either going to peg them with the baseball or not. But the funny thing is that the way the game's programmed, whichever choice you make, you automatically go into this.
Yeah.
And this to me is really, I mean, we talked about this on a podcast that we did together not too long ago, that like they could have easily allowed you to do this sort of reprehensible thing, especially because you are a reprehensible character in this game. You're a Pinkerton, you're a drunkard, you're a gambler, you're not characterized as someone who really gives a crap about things. And you imagine that you're on this mission, you might do a reprehensible thing.
Just to maintain your cover.
And maintain your cover. And in fact, a very simple and not, going back to that Cliffy B quote, he was saying, well, deep linguistic systems are really hard to program. Some of these more complex human interactions are not, maybe we're not there yet. But this isn't actually something that's very hard.
Yeah, I mean, it could literally just be the A button or B button.
Right, and the game could simply just make you go through more and more reprehensible acts until you're just like, fuck it. I am going to start murdering these terrible, terrible people. Like, these people are worse than I am.
Do you remember, I'm trying to think of the outlet that published it. Maybe it was ABC? There was an article
On
where
Infinite?
dudes like, you have this baseball and they're like, hey, throw it at this interracial couple that we've like dressed in sackcloth. So he's like, the choice is, do you want to be Hitler or not? And it's like, that's really not the choice here. The choice is like, it's not even really a choice really, but it's like, it's far more about peer pressure than it is. And like, it just seems like a lot of people miss the point because the racial imagery was so charged that like, well, of course I wouldn't do that. But like the idea behind that sort of like social pressure is that like you may do things you would not do. You probably wouldn't throw a baseball at like an interracial couple, but there's a degree of these.
In that world you might, and
that character.
They're not letting you. So, and again, this isn't necessarily about player agency. It's about player experience. So like. And the thicker the world, the more that becomes obvious. So the forced choices in something like Spec Ops feel like they are producing a kind of commentary, producing a kind of experience that's incredibly important. The forced choice in Infinite breaks that world in half. It's very jarring with the thickness of the world.
Also Spec Ops, the idea behind the choices in Spec Ops is like, oops, there weren't any choices. And it turns out there aren't really in video games
and that
ever.
is kind of
like, that's the point of the game, is like, hey, all those times you thought you were making choices? Not really, usually.
Yeah, and the other example, we don't have a picture for this, but the other example I always think of for this is the mission in basically all of Mass Effect, but really the one that really stands out for me is the mission in Mass Effect 2 where you're doing Talia's like loyalty mission, and you're like finally. So Mass Effect, very thick world, wonderful, right? RPG, you get all this interaction. The characters are very believable.
Hundreds of audio about like alien hierarchy.
And you're reading about their cultures and again. Thickness is the key word here, and then you finally get to experience one of these, massive, interesting alien cultures, and they're having a trial, and you're like, oh, we're going to get into some kind of interesting system. They're like, no, the way we're going to solve this trial is you're going to shoot a bunch of dudes in the face. For me at least, this instantaneously breaks what this game has been doing, and not in a very productive manner. This is also not to say that we hate Bioshock Infinite or Mass Effect. I think we both actually quite enjoyed those games. But the point being that there's sort of a missed opportunity to sort of integrate the game mechanics and the world through actually trusting that players will experience things and players will be able to experience things that aren't either broadcast through visual communication that are broadcast through an interactive.
I think it was about the game Sleeping Dogs, which is like sort
I
of
don't know that
a
one.
Grand Theft Auto clone, but you're a Hong Kong cop, so you're like undercover in the triads. And I think it was that game. The developers are like, well, we spent like 5 hours or so making sure we didn't give you a gun, because as soon as a dude gets a gun, they're just gonna want to use the gun for everything. And I was like, I don't know. Like if in that Mass Effect situation, they were like, all right, let's present some evidence for this trial, and you had to like pick the right evidence, and it was like Phoenix Wright
Phoenix
in the middle,
Wright,
like
it would not have been. You don't think that would have been?
yeah, totally. That would be super fun. I mean, that's the thing. Is like when you think about diversity of systems in video games, you're like, how can I modify my assault rifle?
Yeah.
Or like, what skills do I level up? But like, why shouldn't there be a game like if Mass Effect is clearly of the Star Trek school of sci-fi? Like, they didn't shoot the phasers all the time.
Yeah.
Like, maybe
Sometimes you just give them the stem bolts.
yeah, like it's like well, why didn't they have the episode where they were trading for the gold press latinum?
Yeah.
So it would have been nice to have just a little variety, and that also it doesn't end run around like the being beleaguered by the violence like I was talking about with Uncharted. Like, if you didn't kill 500 dudes in Uncharted, this is like, I'm not going down the path of ludonarrative dissonance, which I find to be a detestable term. But my problem isn't that like, oh, look at this happy-go-lucky guy, like look how many people he's murdered, in the sense of like, how could he be so happy-go-lucky? He's killed 500 people. It's more like, why can't I just kill 100 people?
Well, I mean, that also gets into the game-breaking thing in Uncharted. It's not just characterization. It is also that the more you increase a realism in a game, and Uncharted, clearly the entire point of the game is a certain kind of like verisimilitude in film kind of experience, right? And yet, what occurs is you switch from those sections in which you are like fully fleshed out human, not like you said, maybe not so much just on the murdering front, but the fact that you suddenly turn into like a Gears of War bullet sponge,
and then you have the regenerating health, like
So that
It's
is
just weird.
kind of game breaking.
Do you want to move on?
Yeah.
And then our final category is normative violence.
Did we put the quote in here, or
It might be on a later slide. But if you want to just, we have
I'll
it
just
here.
introduce the idea. I think it's on one of our later slides. There'll be a longer quote, but normative violence people often associate with the theorist Judith Butler from her work Gender Trouble. But just to sort of put it bluntly, it's thinking about violence that is not things bumping into each other, unless we are talking about the sort of the things being concepts or emotions.
Which is to say, like, it's not hitting them with an axe.
Yeah, so violence occurs in video games and other media that has absolutely nothing to do with. I'm sort of doing this backwards because we were going to transition with some sort of middle cases, but I'll just put it out there. For example, in the game Catherine, the game is essentially Qbert, or it's basically Qbert plus puzzles.
Yeah.
This is a pretty non-violent, if not wholly non-violent mechanic. But within the game is, a broad swath of like normative ideas about men and women, about what relationships are, what you desire, what you should desire, right? This game it's a pedagogical function.
The eventual moral of the game is like, hey man, just grow up and get married.
Yeah, so like this is actually communicating a huge amount of information to the player. This actually, to me, is so much more troubling than even, say, the Modern Warfare example. Because to me, like something that has a social hook, something that actually deals with a social norm that is actually part of like everyday society. So like no one says it's okay to go and, whatever's happening here, no one says it's okay to go and do that. But there's a lot of people right now, if we turn on the radio or whatever, or sorry, we just drove up, so I'm thinking about the radio,
Weird.
like who would be like, yeah, you know what, like here's, these gender norms are true, these racial norms are true. I mean, this is something I'm thinking about this morning a lot. I think this is Resident Evil 5, right?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the sort of better critiques of Resident Evil 5 isn't not the problem that you're shooting all these black dudes. It's that the game is using blackness as a category of horror. Like, it is generating fear through the idea
I
of
think
blackness.
the primary issue, which, I don't know, I've got the trailer like a little deeper in here. This was
okay.
my plan. So you want to continue with that? Or
No, we'll come back to it.
Back to it. So the original example we had.
Yeah, this is a great
Silent
example.
Hill 2. And Silent Hill 2, I don't know, you can plug your ears if you don't want it spoiled for you, I guess. The idea behind Silent Hill 2 is a dude gets a letter from his wife. She's been dead for 3 years. And she's like, hey, come on over to Silent Hill and let's meet up. And he's like, hey, that's pretty weird because she's been dead for 3 years. What's that about? And then as the game goes on, you're progressing through these like pretty gross environments, Silent Hill style. I think it will probably dawn on most people that all the enemies are like explicitly feminine, and not even just like necessarily explicitly feminine, but like clearly just feminine objects. Like this character,
feminine sexual objects.
like you can't really tell, but I mean this character attacks with a vagina in its chest, and there's another character that's just the legs of mannequins like stacked on top of each other, end to end, 2 pairs of mannequin legs.
Right, and so this is an interesting transition case from thinking about the sort of explicitly violent games into the normatively violent games, because A, you are going to massacre these creatures, but B, there's actually a sort of like a notion of the sort of horror of the feminine, or the danger of the feminine, or that you should be in fear of the feminine.
I mean, and that ties in directly with the main character's psychology. To ruin the end of the game, it's believed that his wife died of illness 3 years ago, cancer or something. And it's revealed at the end of the game that actually he mercy killed her, quote unquote. And there's a little give, which one way or another, depending on how you play the game, whether it was sort of dark or if he really believed he was, doing her a favor, quote unquote again. But the idea being that is that his choice? And this is a question the game is positing. This is not hey, look at these guys who made this game and they're really creeped out by women. This is the intent of the game, is to put forth this character who's basically well, it's my decision if my wife lives or dies, because kind of I'm tired of it at this point.
Right, but I mean, even outside that narrative structure, there's this question of sort of hooking into and reproducing a certain kind of social norm.
Yeah, it's also the interesting thing about Silent Hill 2 is because this character effectively has amnesia, even though he doesn't. He doesn't believe that he has amnesia. He doesn't wake up at the beginning of the game. He's like, what happened? Where am I? But he has edited his version of events. You sympathize with him more than you would a character who's sure did kill my wife, and that's what this game is about.
Is that the case we're moving to? Or?
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're...
Oh, the Gears of War.
No, I'd forgotten about that completely. So we can actually, we can skip this video, because it's maybe a little NC-17.
Do you want to just give
It's also, incredibly dark, so I don't think you guys can
don't
even
do the
see
video.
anything.
Did you change the lights?
No.
I don't think it's worth it.
I think it's a little too grown up. But, functionally, it's a rape scene, but it's a, giant man with no face. He's got a metal pyramid for a head. I should have brought a picture of that, physically assaulting these the pairs of mannequin legs while your character hides in the closet and watches. And that's sort of the crystallization point for the whole game of him being this character that's hey man, it wasn't me. I was just there. And that's the same thing with the murder of his wife. He's she died, I just sort of existed. And then, as the game progresses, you realize that this pyramid-headed guy that raped these characters, and there's this repeated sense of voyeurism where he's hanging out with the reincarnation of his wife, but she's the sexy reincarnation, and she's oh, don't you like me so much better than her?
Yeah.
And she gets murdered 2 or maybe 3 times over the course of the game, and every time it's sort of You know, I was just around. Like, I left the room and I came back and she was
an
dead.
evacuation of authority or responsibility.
And that's what's really interesting about Silent Hill 2 is, like, at the end of the game, it's like, it turns out, no, you probably can't exculpate yourself from that sort of thing. Like, you were there, I guess, is the eventual moral. But yeah, like I said, I mean, the scene's pretty extreme, but
yeah, we'll just.
this scene is also somewhat extreme.
you wanna do
Maybe
this
that's
one or
too
no?
dark too. I mean, this is Gears of War 2, which is like the through plot for the first two games for this side character is like, I really want to find my wife. She's missing. The like underground alien lizards took her.
So it might be worth playing this one because I think there's actually a lot to say here.
literally
Do you
don't
think
think it's visible.
how visible?
You can turn off the
Oh sure.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, because
'Cause this is a-
this is probably worth watching. It's not really graphic per se, but
It's
the
worth
imagery is a
watching.
little disturbing. So
It's
if
worth
you wanna
watching conceptually.
cover your
for what
eyes,
we're talking
maybe.
about.
Thanks, dude.
Maria. Maria.
And she's wearing like high heels.
Dumb. No, no, no. No, babe. No, 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 no. What did they do to you? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Maria. I tried to find you. God, I did. Please, no. Maria. God damn it, it's me, Dominic. It's Dominic. Marcus, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do, man. No. It's okay. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I love you so much.
Oh, this is actually the one that continues for
Oh,
a
we
little
should just
longer.
stop that.
Well, no, you gotta give it like 30 more seconds because it goes in a good place. Where it's like, hey, buddy, you wanna decompress about that? You wanna take a moment, think it over?
I'm sorry about Maria, but she's in a better place now. You did what you had to do. I found a way to sneak
Yep.
into Nexus.
It's like, okay, but now we're gonna go kill the aliens.
That was it. That was emotional reflection time in
Yeah.
Gears of War 2.
You did what you had to do.
To me, what's fascinating. So I will happily fully admit I had not played this game and pretty much only know this scene of it because we have talked about it like 100 times, like around the house. But like,
I mean, aside from the writing of like being composed of like 50% no, like,
Yeah.
no.
But the thing that actually, again, why this fits nicely also under the category of not just violence. There's obviously violence in the scene, right? Off screen, shoots her in the head, mercy killing.
Yeah.
It's not really clear. Like, well, we'll get there maybe. But like the thing that I want to think about in terms of normative violence or normativity here is actually sort of the opposite of what we were talking about with Silent Hill at the very beginning. Like this isn't caricature images of femininity, although in his mind he sort of pictures his wife in this perfect way, and when she's not, then she's okay to kill. That's pretty screwy. But the way in which they are characterizing masculinity is actually extraordinarily interesting. So like not only are they visually depicted as these sort of like hulking,
football players.
football
like
he-men.
his hand is twice the size of her head.
But
when
the
he
like
puts it around.
doing the thing that has to be done is mercy killing your wife.
It's also like it's not even that it's not even given a second thought. It's like literally not even verbalized.
Yeah, and
He's like he says it's okay.
Disaffection
Like,
and
what does that mean?
and approval is
He's
essentially the only
he's like
norms
I already
that matter.
know because we have a psychic link that like you've decided to mercy kill your wife, so I'm gonna say it's okay and then go for it.
Or like it's okay. This is the only thing we do. I mean,
Yeah.
it gets at an idea that like the thing that might be much more violent in Gears of War than sawing bugs in half, which essentially is a cartoon experience. Is that like what's going on with the depiction of these characters and the depiction of some of the wife. Sorry, I got a little distracted. Could actually be a much more interesting case of a violence that is happening within a game narrative. And in this case, not, to my mind, 100% successfully, because it has nothing to do with mechanics and nothing to do with the sort of player experience. It's kind of just broadcast.
Yeah. I mean, it's also just, it's super weird because it's like, hey, these are big old dudes in armor, and like, what am feelings? Like, we'll feel feelings after we sneak into that base.
Like, we should not have those feelings. All right.
So it's just, it's like completely from the opposite angle. And that's what a lot of people say, like, the sexism in games thing has been going on a lot this past couple of years. And people are like, but what about the sexism of men? Like, what about the objectification of men? And it's like, totally yes, but what you're talking about is like, look at those big Gears of War football guys. I could never be one, and women think those are hot. And that's not fair to me. And it's like, no. Actually, what you're talking about is like, you could never be one of those guys, and you should be like mad because the world has like sold you this fiction.
I think
like,
both.
This is the only way to be. Like, the problem here is not that like women think the football men are hot,
Oh, no,
and that's
of course
the
not.
same as like Bayonetta, to choose an example.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, first off, that's largely not true. I mean, it's true to a certain extent. But the issue is not that, like, hey, man, just like I have Bayonetta, girls have Gears of War. The issue is, like, dude, they're, like, telling you some, like, rank shit.
Yeah, that
about,
you are,
like,
you are
what
an
you are,
affectless,
what it is to be a
aggressive-
man.
Yeah, precisely.
And then I guess finally in this
Do you wanna
topic,
play the
this
trailer?
is the Resident Evil trailer.
Cool.
So this is really the controversy about this game was the trailer, not the game itself. And like, just let it speak for itself. Oh, is this not the right one?
This looks like, this is not the one I was thinking. Oh, maybe it is. Is it the one with the
This is, like,
loudspeaker?
really short. I think I might have grabbed the wrong one. The one where it's like, been 10 long years
This
I've
is
been
not
living
the
this
one.
trail. Yeah, I guess this must have been like the initial teaser.
No, the initial teaser is the one that's crazy.
No, I think this might have been like the reveal. So I mean, effectively that really sucks because like the imagery in that is sort of
All right.
crucial.
You might even want to pause this and just talk about the other one.
Yeah. So whatever. what the actual trailer is, big dude, Chris Redfield, walking through like a village, being like, 10 long years I've been working this case, and now finally time to bring the people to justice. While these like incredibly sinister African people are like literally like hiding in the shadows in tents, staring at him.
And it's really important to note that in this trailer,
They're
especially
not
this
like
first trailer, these
contextualized as zombies. They
these are just
look
people.
like humans.
And there's a man speaking in a foreign language over a loudspeaker, and all again, this is sort of something I was touching on earlier. All the effects of fear are building off of, or are reflecting and reproducing sort of existing norms of fear of the third world, of black people, of all kinds of things, that is actually probably more troubling in terms of a case of violence than the fact that you shoot some zombies in the game.
So Ngai Kroll, the ex-Games journalist, was the guy that really brought this to light, and he caught a lot of flack that essentially the refrain against him was, well, we killed like a whole bunch of Spanish people in the last one. Why is that different?
And the reason why this is different.
There's just like, there's a totally different cultural context.
Yeah, you know, there's not a huge history of like hulking American dudes going to Spain and murdering villagers. I mean, you might think this is splitting hairs, but actually I do think that playing off this, like that especially that trailer, the game more broadly is playing off of a certain historical fact of, you know, white intervention in Africa, of European
in the game
intervention
itself. I think they actually, I presume they really took that controversy to heart, because afterwards, you know, maybe this was planned, maybe it wasn't. They introduced she's like Aboriginal, I think, but they introduced a non-white character.
Sheva, but she's a light skin.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah. But you've got like a sidekick in the game who's just straight up African, and has like the best accent. There's a lot of good accents that come out of but anyway, they really try, or they try in their sort of Resident Evil way to make the game about imperialism. And good. Basically, like, you know, as you progress through the game, you find these notes where it's like, oh, isn't this great? Like, we're these villagers, and these doctors came, and they're giving us all vaccinations, and it's free. And so they're giving it their best shot. It's still Resident Evil, which is like, there's like a limit, there's a threshold to that quality, but they at least tried to contextualize it as like, hey, remember this like crazy history of oppression that's like more than 400 years old. It's happening again. Right. It's just in a different way. Like,
this is actually, I think, a good transition to the last thing we were going to say, because, you know, is that correct? Or
is that the Judith Butler?
Well, I was going to say that the part where she says don't. Let's switch to the next slide.
I think this is, it's not actually on there. I must have forgotten to paste that one, but we can read it.
So the same theorist I was talking about before, talking about normative violence, you know, says the answer to this is not necessarily. I don't think this is the quote that's up there.
I can take it away.
Oh no, it's fine. You know, it's not so much that we should avoid all this imagery. In fact, sort of not having violent imagery in a very violent world can do as much of this violence as showing it. So the question is not, again, it's not, okay, let's all have Hugs and Puppies the game, or let's just have Modern Warfare, this is the only options. It's how do we want to arrange these things. So the quote I had, and this is from a book she wrote called Precarious Life right after 9/11, well, she said, the media's evacuation of the human through the image has to be understood. This is when we don't depict violence. In terms of the broader problem that the normative schemes of intelligibility establish that what will and will not be human, what will be a livable life and what will be a grievable life. So how are we going to think about our own deaths as player characters? How are we going to think about the things we are seeing killed? And she goes on to say, sometimes these normative schemes work precisely through providing no image. And this is normative schemes that are even more violent, right? So if you are, especially in a case where you've been, I like to bring things out to a real world example. Our country's been at war for 10 years. If we don't have media that is expressing ideas about violence that are incredibly violent, that are dealing with violence, that is actually a huge form of normative violence. You are facing the existence of violence in the world.
It's like, oh, well, it must not be that bad because nobody's like really seems too bothered by it.
I feel like the quote that most sums this up, again, this is from I think, the theorist who has most sort of talked about this sort of idea of the violence of norms. She says the eraser of that suffering through the prohibition of images and representations. So the idea that let's just clean it all up, let's make it nice and pretty, more generally circumscribes the sphere of appearance, basically what we can see and what we can know. So if we don't, so the whole point of this, we've been kind of ragging on a bunch of games, is not to get rid of violence in games, but to think about systems and ways in which we can, as players, think about games critically. So even about your sort of modern warfares, and things like that, but also encourage a kind of criticism that fosters games that do interact in the way of some of the things we found more interesting in something like
We've
Spec
also,
Ops.
we got just one more snippet from
Okay.
those couple paragraphs of her, where
Oh,
she
we
says, sometimes these normative schemes work
Oh, I
precisely
read.
through providing no image, no name, no narrative, so that there never was a life and there never was a death, which
Yeah.
feels like exactly video games.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, here is something that's essentially fake and entirely faceless.
Yeah.
And don't worry about it.
And it's I think the goal is both to sort of encourage through critical literature a certain and this is happening in games. So there's games where there now are faces on the enemies, but also to sort of be able to like reflect and reproduce as players, like putting faces to things, thinking about what the game violence is saying to you. As an experience, not as a question of choice, but as a question of how you are feeling, how you are experiencing this action.
That's pretty much it. So
Yeah.
these are just our concluding thoughts.
Go ahead.
So, we say that games that have something interesting to say tend to focus on what the player is doing, not sort of what they're putting out there for you. That's sort of the thing about video games that makes them cool, is that you're not in the driver's seat per se, but I think when we had our last panel, we kind of made it like you're an actor in a play.
I always like the ballet example too.
Okay, yeah. So you're following a structure,
Yeah.
but you have ways to move within that structure, which is something totally different from like watching a movie.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the cool thing about the Michael Haneke thing from earlier. He's like this, not everything he says is gold, but essentially he's like, my objective is to make somebody like really, really want to leave the theater, but don't.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the cool thing about Spec Ops, is that like I feel like the objective of that game isn't to make you stop playing it. Like, people want their art to be experienced. The objective of that game is to make you think about why you're still playing it.
Right, and the same thing applies to something like Shadow of the Colossus, being the classic example, I think. And I guess the second point, beyond sort of player experience, and also player experience involves a certain amount of design trust. I feel like, and
That's
both,
kind of
both
like the-
players and designers always think the answer is more systems, whereas sometimes the answer is not systems at all. It's actually like remembering that there's a human being system playing the game
It's
in the first
also
place.
like the idea that like let's make sure there's like a button so you know where to go, or
Yeah.
like it's a straight line. And in Modern Warfare, it like literally kills you if you walk the wrong
This is
direction.
why
It's like no, just do over. You went down the wrong street.
I think the second point we really wanted to make, I don't know if this is up there or not. Oh yeah, that violence mechanically, so remember that sort of targeting from first-person shooters, or the sort of mechanical violence in something like simple as Mario, or graphical violence, your Gears of War, your Modern Warfares. It's not necessarily an argument of itself it's not for or against itself. It's not necessarily an argument in itself at all. It's not even necessarily a kind of consciousness of violence or a self-consciousness of violence. It only makes sense within the context of the player experience and of the world that it is setting out. And that's sort of a much more difficult way of thinking about violence in games, and a much more, I think, interesting and hopefully productive way of thinking about violence in games than the sort of binary measuring systems that we've had in a lot of the literature and a lot of the media, sort of, I feel like, up till pretty recently.
Okay, and then the sort of the final point is like it's important for everybody to sort of lean in together.
Yeah.
And just think about these things. So the idea that we have here, we say it's important for criticism to help foster player subjectivity.
Yeah.
The idea behind that is like you're part of this mold.
Yeah.
Like you're not like, I'm just here shooting zombies or whatever, and they made the game. I'm just like this robot that pushes the buttons and levels up.
Yeah, you want the player to have it, and again, this isn't a system in the game. This is about the players themselves to have a reflective moment. Have I said here refract, sort of reflect what this violence can mean into the world, into other games, and reflect on what it means in the game and to the player themselves. And not to sort of, I think this was actually your line, but I'll happily say it, not to sort of just immediately go to, it's just a game.
It's just a game. Which is like the constant response to criticism.
Yeah.
Hey, don't worry about it, man. It's just a game.
But it's not just a game. It actually has, as I hope we've demonstrated throughout this talk, games have a lot of meaning, all over the place. Whether they are a very dumb game or a very smart game, all of them are laden with all kinds of ideas.
So with that, that's the idea. Maybe the text is garbage. That's taking a stance regarding modern warfare. But we should approach it critically, even if it is modern warfare.
I agree. So
that's it.
Yeah, and if you're interested in our organizations, here are our websites.
Thanks a lot for coming, guys. We know it was slightly inconvenient because the time got rescheduled. And thanks for RIM panels for helping us out with rescheduling our time because our schedules just sort of disintegrated at the last minute.
Really badly.
And Friday just wasn't going to happen. But thanks for everyone who managed to come out anyway, even against all odds, I guess.
Yeah, and if there are any questions or just thoughts, feel free to bring them up.
I think actually
Are we out of time?
I think we're like 4 minutes.
Okay, if anyone has questions that only last 4 minutes long. Yeah, sure. Do we talk too much?
I was actually like, we blew through the first half of it in about 15 minutes. I was like, we better start panning this out. But,
but thanks
it did
again.
eventually work, and thanks so much for coming, everyone.
Oh, and if you were here last year, I'm still sending you last year's paper. Thanks.
Yeah, our intention was to be like, we'll have the tiny URL to the slides in this one, so we can just give it to people. I finished the slides on the car ride up this morning, so that wasn't going to happen.